Hi, Becca. It's awesome to have you with me this morning.
Thanks
Lovely
for
to
having
see
me.
you. Yeah. So we'll just get started, and I'd just love if you would tell me about yourself. So, like your interests and hobbies, and your experiences in, the arts and in life.
I live in Halifax and I've been here for about 10 years now, working in the arts community, which obviously during COVID has been a bit up and down. Um, Kind of an inconsistent industry, but I work as an actor and singer and performer in general. And then to help kind of sustain and make that a full time career, I kind of send myself out to do choreography or directing or vocal directing for youth productions or for community productions, things like that. And yeah, that's pretty much what I do. Interest wise, I like that's pretty much it. I crochet a lot. Made a lot of things, especially during lockdowns. But yeah, that's pretty much me.
Wow, I've always seen you as a very important in arts education. So I'm not
Thank you.
surprised that that's one of your main things in life.
Yeah, I
Um,
think so.
so you've also recently uh, started with HDC, which is the Hair Design College, right? Or
Yeah,
yeah. And I'd love to hear more about that, like how you became interested in it and like how it's been going, because you do
yeah.
beautiful work. Like I see like um there's like a lot of like kind of very intricate like braiding that you've done and like some color work, and it's always like so
hmm
amazing to me, and I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, I think for myself, again, with COVID being kind of really inconsistent, I definitely wanted to have something that could feasibly be a more consistent income for myself. Um, Again, because we don't really know what live performance is going to look like for the next while,
Yeah.
for an indeterminate amount of time.
Yeah.
So I've always been kind of interested because I did a lot of work with theater, having to do my own stuff and doing a lot of wig work. And I was like, this might be a really fun thing to do, but I've never had the time to do it. And so I felt like I finally had time and I give it a shot. So that's kind of where I found myself now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm
And
I'm really enjoying it. It's
yeah,
great.
it's going well. That's
hmm
awesome. Yeah.
I have about 3 months left, and then out in the world.
Wow, that's great. And do you have like a way that you can like work on that at home, or do you have like do you go into to like do stuff at the college?
So we're actually like next week coming out of being on a brief lockdown, which has made like the program a little difficult because we've had to work around COVID restrictions, obviously, and
Hmm.
gathering restrictions. But then also with our province being in a bit of a lockdown, that has made a huge pause happen. So we have to do the majority of our program in person because it's a lot of
Hmm.
practical work.
Yeah.
Um, but we do have stuff we can work on at home. Like we have terrifying mannequin heads and tripods to work on. So yeah.
No, that's awesome. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, and so you have a lot of experience like as a performer, and I feel like you've acted in a wide variety of shows, and I've seen a lot of them, and I've been in them
Yeah.
a lot of them with you as well. But some of the shows you've been in, so uh, Next to Normal, I believe that was one that you were very like heavily involved with, like aside from being a
Yeah.
performer as well.
Yeah.
And you were in Spring Awakening, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Um,
hmm
so uh, despite the existence of shows like these, like that are telling like stories about the importance of mental health, often professional actors are not given the support that they need in their careers, which is a big problem in the industry. And I
Yeah.
mean, from my experience, like rehearsing and performing can be, especially depending on the content of the show, can be very emotionally and physically taxing.
hmm
And it's not easy, and but I've learned that it's very important to like prioritize yourself and your health as much as you can, because
hmm
as an actor, like your career is like yourself. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you'd like to like comment on this, or like share your experience with like the importance of mental and
Yeah.
physical health in theater.
I mean, I think in general, there's a bit of a stigma that if you're a performer, you're kind of naturally mentally unwell, which I think is also unfair.
Yeah.
Um, I think it takes a really I think it takes a lot of self-understanding and self-knowledge to dedicate your life to being a performer, and it takes, a real contract with yourself to check in with your mental health and your physical well-being and your emotional well-being because it is taxing. You're putting yourself in a vulnerable position constantly in a lot of circumstances. And, it might be easy to view that as, well, if I'm a bit feeling unstable, then this will be easier for me to access, but that's actually more damaging
Yeah.
because, you're not able to turn it off and to decide when you want to be able to tap into experiencing that. So, I have noticed in the professional world, I think like really the last year that we were performing anything was like 2018, early 2019. And there was a big shift pushing into like mental health and, talking about when things were an issue and making sure people were heard and being respected. Particularly, I find women in theater have had a really hard history because
Mhm.
there's a really fine line in being able to stand up for yourself and still coming across as respectful because I think in general, when women have anything to say, it's seen as immediately a bit aggressive.
Yeah,
So, it's also easy to understand that if you're a person who's feeling like you're not being heard, it's always going to begin a little more aggressive because you're coming from a place of wanting to be understood and
exactly.
heard. So it's a little harder to approach that with a perfectly calm mind all the time. Um, but I was noticing a shift in people like really starting to take interest and want to make sure that that's part of the process. But even still, there are definitely shows I've worked on where either the team or people in the show weren't respectful of that. And I think it's definitely something I'd like to see more dialogue around and people being more aware that it shouldn't be the norm and that it's also okay for people to say this is not okay for me.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
and learning to take that and not be offended by it, right? Because mental health is so important.
Yeah. And I feel like that's also, like, as you're saying, it's something that definitely there needs to be more dialogue around. And like, um, you know, most of my experience is like also kind of in arts education. I mean, also in
Hmm.
performance, but that's something that I think is very important. Like when you're working with young people, and
Yeah.
like when you're doing like theater training, because like teaching, like it needs to have that additional like facet of training where like you teach that like you need like to stand up for yourself and
Yeah.
like to speak up, because that isn't, or like in the past it hasn't been the norm. And
No,
also, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that's very accurate in that kind of doing like any sort of training program. And I mean, in the past, maybe not currently, but the instinct is to teach you to learn how to be a good actor and take in what everybody else is giving you and just sort of be submissive and do that.
Oh,
Your instinct is being to know what happened and and being able to still a relevant part. And I do think there needs to be more focus on teaching even how to have that dialogue. Like that's never a discussion I remembered having in any sort of like training outlet I had. It was never a discussion of here's a great way to have a conversation with like someone who technically would be a leader or a superior in the situation and have your needs met and heard, but not feel disrespectful.
yeah.
So I think, yeah, that is an incredibly important thing to start talking about.
Yeah. And yeah, and I mean that's something that is, I think a lot of the time, uh where like people will teach, I maybe this isn't like the perfect way to describe it, but like method acting, and like taking
Hmm.
from your personal experiences to improve your acting, make it more realistic.
Hmm.
But often that can be a very, like you said, it's a very, very vulnerable position, and that isn't
Yeah.
necessarily what we should be teaching like right now, is like, and especially while not offering um, people the skills they need to deal with like the emotions that will
Yeah.
come when they're like reliving experiences to like improve their art.
that's kind of always been my personal fear and thought with people in general that focus a lot on method acting, because I definitely think at heart it's a really interesting concept, and the whole process, if done correctly, could be really helpful and useful and wonderful. But I feel like when people amateurly take it on, the thought is, if I don't process this emotional experience I'm having, I can save it and then deal with it when I can use it. But if you're
Yeah,
not actually processing it and dealing with it at the time, trying to be able to utilize that later is incredibly volatile and really unpredictable. So you're putting yourself in a place where you're completely unsafe and vulnerable in a way that you're not comfortable with, versus experiencing something, living with it, and saying, yeah, I remember what that feels like. And I think I could now access and understand because I've lived that experience. So you never
mhm,
lose that lived experience. You just, if you're processing it, have the ability to access it safely and remember it safely and
yeah,
predictably,
yeah,
which I think people picture like live performance and they're like, oh, it's so exciting and wild and it's always different. And I'm like, well, really, it's not. It's a formula. I think of performance a lot.
so you were just saying that it uh, often like people see that like performances are very like live theater is very exciting and um,
Mhm.
every time it's different, but really it's not. I think that's where you're going.
Yeah, it's like anything else. There is a bit of a formula to it where you still have your list of things that are always going to be consistent. So as much as you have room to play and to experience and to like maybe feel an emotion or a moment slightly differently every time, you're still hitting the same moment. So
Mm,
yes, there is room to make it organic within that, but it is still the exact same system every night. It's not like you get on stage and it's a brand new show every single time, You're going on and you're doing the same thing. So you're
mhm,
finding little ways to make it organic and exciting for yourself. But that said, taking a volatile, unpredictable sense of mental health or emotion into that does not help you or do a service to any of the actors with you
mm,
who are trying to perform the same thing every single time, essentially.
yeah,
And I mean, I think that's something we forget too, is that if we're trying to use our mental health to access into theater, we're not recognizing that that being volatile and unpredictable is also hard for other people we're working with. Like that
yeah,
isn't respectful to the other company members that you're there with. They deserve consistency. They
yeah,
deserve to work with what they've signed up to work with. And as do you. Like you deserve to know what you're doing every time.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, that's very interesting. And there's so many different ways, from just like professionalism to your own health and like your own
Yeah.
well-being, and then also the quality of your performance. It
Yeah.
all benefits from taking care of yourself and making sure that you know you aren't like creating that
Yes.
volatility. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I especially find too with professional shows because as much as the show changes, the system never changes,
mm,
like unless it's a really specific type of thing. But like, for example, I feel like, when you're doing a musical, you're coming in, you're learning music, you're learning choreography, you're blocking a show. Sometimes it's something you're working on that's like a new piece. And so there might be a workshopping element to it or things might be changing. But as you go, it's the exact same system. You rehearse for 2.5 weeks or 2 weeks, you have tech for a week or week and a half, and then you open your show. And it's the same system every time.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, yeah, for sure. Um, if there's anything else you'd like to share, Becca, you can go ahead. But otherwise, I think we can wrap this up.
I think I'm good. Thanks for talking with me.
Thank you so much for coming.